and welcome. In my last video I did a practical demonstration of a whole variety of different trumpet mutes so that you could hear the sounds that each of them made. In today's video we're going to be talking about each of the different mutes. Some of them have got very much no interesting features, some of them have got a few interesting features, so I hope this video will be useful. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the mutes that there are. This is just an exhaustive list of all the mutes that I have. So let's start with straight mutes. I've got three here. The first one is this one here, which is a LeBlanc made in the United States. It's made out of aluminium. Yes, aluminium, and it features three corks around the edge of this section here so that it can stick into your bell without needing to be held in place. I've got a second one which is very similar although slightly different, and this one was made by Dennis Wick in London. It's got the same general design, it's made by a slightly different feel of metal. I don't really know the difference from a chemistry point of view, but it feels slightly different. It's a little bit larger and it still has the three corks around the side. In terms of design and sound, there's not a huge difference between them. The third straight mute I've got is this mute here. This is also made by Dennis Wick, but it is what's called a combo mute because you've got it in this configuration here, which is like a straight mute, although with a slightly different sort of shape, and you can put this cup attachment over it and you can turn it into a cup mute. Now personally I think that in its cup mute configuration it doesn't sound as nice as a standard cup mute, and in its straight mute configuration it doesn't sound as nice as a standard straight mute. But it does have that benefit of being much more portable. You only have to carry around one mute as opposed to two, and for that reason some people kind of like it.
The second cup mute I have is
this here. This is a Humes and Berg's mute. They call this their stone-lined series, and I think that's related to the sort of material that they spray on this. It is made in America, as the LeBlanc ones were made, but it comes with quite a traditional white and red sort of design. You can usually tell one of these what brand one of these are because of their distinctive colouring patterns. And this is just a cup mute, and I think it sounds quite nice, but it is not like the combo mute, something that transforms into something else. Next up we've got these mutes. These are called Harmon mutes, or also known as wah-wah mutes. We've got, in this hand, we've got a stone-lined mute made by Humes and Berg again. You can tell with the red and white design. Now, unlike the other mutes that I've shown you, these Harmon mutes have actually got a cork all the way around the rim here. So 100% of the air from your instrument goes through this mute, as opposed to the other mutes where the air escapes around the side. And it's got a little bulb in the middle here with this removable tube in it. So you can play this particular mute with a number of different configurations. It's got one sort of sound with the tube in, it's got a different sort of sound if you've extended the tube, and you can combine either one of those sounds and the infinite degree of variations between by using your hand to cut off the sound and make a bit of a wah-wah sort of sound, as you would have seen in my demonstration of these mutes. Next up we have this Dennis Wick Harmon or wah-wah mute, and it's exactly the same. It looks slightly different, but we've got the cork all the way around the rim, we've got this little funnel at the end which we can use for wah-wahs, and it's got the extendable tube. They do sound slightly different. Again, if you haven't seen my video on the sounds of these mutes, then you will probably not know the sound difference, but feel free to have a look at that video. It'll be in the description below for you to have a peruse of it. Getting towards the end of my collection now, this is a Dennis Wick Plunger mute. Now quite often Plunger mutes are only really used in jazz bands or big bands. They're not exclusively used in jazz bands or big bands, but most commonly they are, in my experience anyway, in those particular sort of bands. And quite often people will just go to a hardware store for a few dollars and buy a toilet or a sink plunger, take the handle off, and you've got effectively a plunger mute. Well, this is what a plunger mute actually looks like if you were to go out and buy one. It looks a little bit like a hat, and indeed I've seen some people wear them as a hat, and it's something that you just hold in your hand and use to adjust the sound. You've got an infinite amount of variety because you've got everything from having the bell completely covered, which creates a very muffled sort of sound, to partially covered, to using a wah-wah sort of effect. All that sort of stuff is capable with one of these plunger mutes. And lastly, I have got these two practice mutes. This first one here is a Dennis Wick practice mute, and like the wah-wah and Harmons, it's got a cork all the way around the rim, so all of the air from the instrument is directed into this mute, but it doesn't have anything at the end here. The sound instead comes out a hole on this side and a hole 100 degrees around on this side. It is very good for muffling the sound. In fact, that is the primary function of a practice mute, to make the sound as dead as possible or as quiet as possible, and this does a semi-good job of that. It does unfortunately add a lot of resistance to the sound, so it's physically quite a lot harder to play your instrument, but that comes at the advantage of making your instrument sound a whole lot quieter. This here, the last mute I've got to show you, is a shmute, or a shush mute. It was made here in New Zealand by the Bremner family, and it is by far the best practice mute that I've ever played upon. It's got the cork around the edge here. It's not at the rim, it's slightly further down, and it's slightly different from the practice mute in that it's made out of a sort of plastic instead of aluminium or some other sort of metal. And instead of having two tubes off center, two tubes on the sides, it's got a tube that runs up the middle, sort of like a Harmon mute, and then a small hole at the bottom. This fellow deadens your sound to a remarkable degree without adding nearly as much resistance as the Dennis Wick mute. I have played these in motels or hotels on actually a trombone without upsetting any neighbours, and I've heard reports of people practicing their instrument on an aeroplane or on a train and not upsetting anyone because they're using a mute that makes their instrument so quiet that most people can't even hear it. This has been part 2 of this video, the sort of mini-series on trumpet mutes. If you haven't seen the first video, then I encourage you to watch it because it gives a practical demonstration of what all of these mutes sound like. Thanks very much for watching.